This is an amazing creation festival. It really is awesome. So, boy, there's been so much to do and hear and see. Haven't they done a great job? For everybody that's put this on, let's give them a big round of applause. Well, tonight I'm going to be talking about a talk that I call Journey to Novarupta. And to be honest with you, this is a chance for you guys to help me to keep a promise that I made 15 years ago. 15 years ago, I got a phone call from a gentleman, a creation scientist by the name of Dr. David Shorman, and I was working for a creation organization at the time, and he called me up and told me that he had taken 2 expeditions to this incredible volcano, and he shot a bunch of video footage, and he was wondering if the organization would be willing to make a documentary about it. Well, I talked to the leadership of that organization, and they said no. But I said, Dr. Shorman, if you would like, I'll try and give it my best shot to make the documentary. And surprisingly enough, he said yes. Well, at that time in our lives, we had a whole group of homeschoolers. And those homeschoolers were making radio broadcasts for us, like Dr. John Whitcomb's broadcast, if you've ever heard that. They were producing that. And I realized that the chance to work on this documentary for Dr. Shorman was going to be an amazing chance to teach these young students how to do filmmaking. And so it was so much fun. If you could have seen it, every week we got together with a bunch of homeschoolers, and they were writing scripts and working cameras and figuring out screenshots of all this stuff. And then we took them to a place called Lassen Park, which is in Northern California. And basically what they did was they went out and recreated some of the scenes from the expeditions. And it was so much fun because these homeschoolers were focusing cameras, and they were shooting stuff and working with props and all of that type of stuff. And it was so much fun. That was 15 years ago. I lost the rights to the project to somebody else, and so several years went by. And then I got the rights back, and then I gave the rights to somebody else, and then it sat for about another 7 years. And it wasn't until just a couple of years ago that I got my rights back to the production. And I actually did not have the money to finish the production. And so I went to an organization called Genesis Apologetics, and they agreed to buy the distribution rights in exchange for paying me to finish the production. And so it's so exciting. Just yesterday, Answers in Genesis with Answers TV decided to pick it up, so it's now available on the Answers.tv platform. Also, it's available on Amazon Prime, and that's kind of exciting. And so finally, I'm able to keep that promise I made to Dr. Shorman almost 15 years ago that I would get the message out about this volcano. By the way, it's so much fun because nobody's really heard about Novarupta and the creation movement, and one of the promises I made to Dr. Shorman was that I would get that out to as many people as I could. And so that's kind of what's happening tonight. By the way, it's kind of fun because, I'm not a scientist. I'm just a media producer in the creation movement. And so everybody's got all their research that they can share, and you've got all these awesome scientists that can share all of that. But I'm just a lay person. But a lot of times I'll show up at a creation club, and they'll ask me for a topic. And just about any topic I pick, the people in the audience know as much about it as I do. So that if I fell down dead in the middle of the presentation, they could move my body off the stage, and you can almost pick anybody from the audience to come up and finish the talk for me. But what's been fun is with Journey to Novarupta, nobody has really heard about Novarupta. So we're going to talk about that tonight. By the way, do you want to see a trailer for the documentary that these homeschoolers started to put together? You guys want to see what it looks like? Okay, here we go.
Today I saw a sight no human being has ever laid eyes on. A region in the great Alaskan wilderness laid bare by a volcanic eruption. The utter devastation will make further exploration difficult, My team and I are running low on supplies. This evening, I have left base camp alone to do some scouting. I have not seen an animal or any living creature since entering the blast zone. Tomorrow, we hope to send an expedition out from the base camp. I'm overwhelmed by the amazing power of one volcano to completely change the entire landscape. We have pitched our tent away from the danger of avalanche from the rocks rolling off the mountains around us. This is such a harsh environment. I know danger is a constant concern, but we're determined to press on. I hope the words on the pages of this journal inspire future generations to explore this amazing place.
Some adventures are inspired by fame or fortune, and some by the pursuit of knowledge. But I've had the privilege of following in the footsteps of a man whose discoveries show the glory of the Creator. My name is Kenny Cole, and this is my story.
There you go, Journey to Novarupta. Thank you. Let me start by praying. I woke up a little sick, and so I am not feeling super well, but I'm praying that I'm going to have the passion tonight. So let me go ahead and pray, and then we'll get into this. Dear Father, thank you so much for all of the people who have put on this festival. And Father, thank you for all the people that have shown up and come, and all of the different people speaking and presenting and showing fossils and running booths and all of this, Father. God, I pray that you'd be with me now as I speak. Father, please help me to speak with passion. And Father, please help me to say something that will be of value, Father. And God, I pray for all of our hearts that we would just continue to be excited about your creation. I just pray these things in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. All right, probably about a decade ago, my family got to work with Genesis Apologetics on another video project. It was called Debunking Evolution, and it was so much fun. I got to go through a bunch of public school textbooks to identify all of the different teaching that they did. We found out that there was about 12 different tenets of evolution that kept showing up in textbook after textbook. But I came across this page in this book by the Miller and Levine biology book, and here's what it says about the age of the earth. Evolution takes a long time. If life has evolved, then earth must be very old. Hutton and Lyell argued that the earth was indeed very old, but technology in their day couldn't determine just how old. Half a century after Darwin published his theory, however, physicists discovered radioactivity. Geologists now use radioactivity to establish the age of certain rocks and fossils. Now check this out. This kind of data could have shown that the earth is young. If that had happened, Darwin's ideas would have been refuted and abandoned. Wow. All right, so there's the setup for the night. By the way, clear back before Lyell and Hutton, most geologists believed that the layers and everything were the result of a worldwide flood, and then Lyell and Hutton came along, and then next thing you know, we've got uniformitarianists who are believing in the millions of years, and then that became the popular idea, and of course that's what's being taught in our textbooks and everywhere else nowadays. But then there was something that happened on May 18th of 1980 that would change geology forever.
A magnitude 5.1 earthquake causes the north face of the mountain to collapse, triggering the largest landslide in recorded history. Pressure rising from deep within the volcano rips open the mountainside, toppling entire forests, scorching everything in its path.
Wow, volcanoes are cool. Who likes volcanoes? Yeah. You know, Mount St. Helens changed everything because 200 layers were created in 3 hours. Entire canyon systems were caused in just a matter of weeks and months, and it was amazing. And you know, the argument about whether layers had to take millions of years or not to form, all of a sudden was settled. It could happen very rapidly. And it changed things forever. By the way, if you ask me what my favorite volcano is, I used to be the director at the Mount St. Helens Creation Center, but now I've got to say that it's a different volcano, because what if there was a volcano that was 30 times more powerful? All right, it's June 1st, 1912. Earthquakes were beginning to rock the Indian settlement of Katmai Village and the surrounding 100 miles of an unpopulated area. Soon, the families that were living there, the few that were living there, began to flee for their lives. And then late in the evening of the June 5th, observers at Cold Bay, which was 40 miles to the southwest, looked and saw the black sky, and it looked like it was storming and something big was going on, and they didn't know what. And here's kind of a map for you to get the location of where that's at. And something big was about to happen.
First of all, I will let you know of our unlucky voyage. I do not know whether we shall be either alive or well. We are awaiting death at any moment. Of course, do not be alarmed. A mountain has burst near here, so that we are covered in ash, in some places 10 feet and 6 feet deep. All this began on the 6th of June. Night and day we light lamps. We cannot see daylight. In a word, it is terrible, and we are expecting death at any moment. And we have no water. All the rivers are covered in ash, just ashes mixed with water. Here are darkness, hell, and thunder, and noise. I do not know whether it is day or night. Vanka will tell you all about it. So kissing and blessing you both. Goodbye. Forgive me. Perhaps we shall see each other again. God is merciful. Pray for us.
The villagers were convinced that they were going to die. They didn't know what was going on. They had no clue that there was a volcano. Matter of fact, a bunch of them packed into a ship called the Manning, and they set out to sea just to try and survive, to get away from the land. And you can see that they're packed on the ship. There was no place to lay down. There was no place to do anything. And they stayed out there convinced that just like that they were going to die from the huge volcano. They did not know what was going on, and they were hungry, and they were thirsty, and they stayed there for 2 days just waiting for their death while they're on this ship. Well, that was in 1912, but it was 2 years later that the National Geographic sent in a team of explorers, and the man who led it was a guy by the name of Dr. Robert Griggs, and he actually led 3 expeditions into the wilderness there to find out what had happened at this volcano. By the way, Dr. Griggs was a Christian man, and here you can see that they are on one of their journeys. Grigg and his team faced quicksand, pumice storms, raging rivers, and they also faced falling boulders. So it was total action and adventure. By the way, tonight I'm going to tell you stories of action and adventure. And how's this for a creation talk? I'm even going to throw in some romance tonight. Yeah, how many of you go to a creation talk and hear the romance, but we're going to do it tonight. How's that sound? During the 1916 expedition, Dr. Griggs and a guy by the name of Folsom made an amazing discovery, but their third team member, a guy by the name of Church, was left behind because he ate too many pancakes that morning at base camp, and so they left him behind as they went on to explore without him.
Should we proceed further, Griggs?
Church is probably wondering if we've been dispatched.
Poor Church, incapacitated by too many pancakes.
At least we had someone to stay back and watch our gear.
I must say that I've been utterly surprised by the lack of volcanic activity that I thought would be manifesting itself in such short order after such a grand eruption.
I would agree, Folsom. Okay, I think we need to get back to where Church is waiting.
All right. The steam we thought we were pursuing has shown itself to be nothing more than clouds.
Wait! Folsom, what do you see down there on the floor of the path?
It appears to be a miniature volcano jetting steam.
The binoculars reveal that you are correct.
What do we do now?
I feel we owe it to Church to turn back. We'll return with him. Okay, follow me back.
Yes, sir. What's wrong, sir?
When I turned back at you, I couldn't help but stare down the valley. Look!
More steam!
I know Church is waiting for us, but he can wait a little longer. Folsom, follow me. Wow! Folsom, look what we've discovered.
The valley's dotted with hundreds.
No, thousands
Could it be 10,000?
of fumaroles. It looks as if all the steam engines of the world have been assembled together and have popped their safety valves at once and are letting off a surplus of steam in concert.
Griggs, we need to get down there and have a closer look.
Let's go.
So there you go. That night, Dr. Griggs couldn't sleep in his tent because he was amazed by this huge valley of 10,000 smokes that he had discovered. By the way, here's an actual picture of them. Whoops. There we go. Let me back up. Sorry, push the wrong button. Don't push that button. There you go. There's an actual picture of them exploring. Isn't it neat that they actually took a camera out, huh? Here they are measuring the temperature of one of the fumaroles. So that's kind of neat. Here's Novarupta itself. Now, what? That doesn't look like most volcanoes, does it? But that's actually Novarupta. By the way, when Dr. Shorman sent me the first image of Novarupta, I said, Dr. Shorman, I don't see the volcano on the picture at all. I think you sent me the wrong picture. And he goes, no, that's what Novarupta looks like. You're going to find out why in just a little bit, but that's the actual picture of it. All right. Here's one of the base camps that Dr. Griggs set up. By the way, on one of his expeditions, they were at base camp, and all of a sudden, the wind started to pick up, and it was starting to rip their tents apart and starting to carry away their equipment. And so they had to go running down the valley in the middle of the night. And as they were running down the valley, the wind actually picked him up, and he went flying down the valley. And fortunately, it dropped him in some soft pumice, so he lived to tell the story. By the way, here's their base camp after that. Look, they're just going through all of their stuff. So when you're out in the wilderness with a bunch of fumaroles, how do you cook your food? Well, like that, of course. They're just cooking it right over the fumarole. All right, 3 mountains collapsed during the eruption, and they filled in a valley and backed up the Katmai River, and that made a huge reservoir behind the natural dam. And I'm going to read this so I get my facts right here. The Katmai River remained dammed for 3 years until a very heavy snowfall in 1915, which was right when Griggs was coming in. The dam was breached and an enormous flood broke out into the Katmai Canyon and released enough water to move 33 million cubic yards of material in a matter of hours. Isn't that amazing? So there we go. We can see these huge catastrophic forces that can carve things like canyons very rapidly. And things that you can come and look at later and say, that probably took a very long time to carve, actually happened very quickly. And that's what Dr. Griggs and his family found. Trees were snapped off near ground level for several miles by the violent impact of the water. A fan of huge boulders were deposited at the mouth of the canyon, and the volume of water was so great that it flooded the valley to a depth of approximately 10 feet. So pretty amazing how that happened there at Novarupta. Well, Dr. Griggs took all of his information and he wrote it into a book, and it's called The Valley of 10,000 Smokes. By the way, if you're interested, you can actually get that book. If you Google The Valley of 10,000 Smokes by Dr. Griggs, you can actually read about all of their adventures. All right, you guys ready to time travel with me? We're going to travel back to present time. Here we go. There we go. There's Dr. David Shorman. Now, Dr. Shorman is an adventurer. He would take his friends and family out on fishing trips up in Alaska, just adventure trips to disciple young men. And one time while they were up there, they came across this little lodge, and inside the lodge, Dr. Shorman found Dr. Griggs' book. And then he went and downloaded the book from 100 years ago, and he began reading it, and he said, wow, there are some amazing creationist implications here. I want to take my team back to visit Novarupta. So he assembled a team. Here's the team right there. Going left to right, to the left is Kenny, which is Dr. Shorman's son. Joel is the next one over to the right. He's an accomplished explorer at his age. Mike, a seasoned leader who had accompanied Dr. Shorman on many adventures. Next to him is John, who is Mike's son. He had recently broken his back, and he was about to head out into this incredible adventure. And then Tommy, who just loved the thrill of adventure. Here's where they went to. The only way to get to Katmai National Park is where they were at, is by a boat or by float plane. And they broke up into two teams. And the reason they did that is the rest of the team had something to do for a couple days. So Dr. Shorman and Kenny went ahead of everybody. And then the rest of the guys were going to plan to join them out in the wilderness a little bit later. So here's the first night they spent at Brooks Lodge. By the way, have you guys ever seen the pictures of the river with all the fish jumping into bears' mouths? So that's where this is happening at, is Katmai Park. They spent their first night there. The second night, they actually went out to the wilderness and started packing in. Now, here's what they said, is that you've got the observation center with all of the green foliage, and then all of a sudden you just walk out into this wilderness where there is nothing. There's no plants, there's no insects, no birds. It's just nothing. And so they hiked and hiked and hiked, and they spent the first night in the shelter of the Buttress Mountain Range because there was all kinds of wind. Their goal was to get to some USGS cabins. By the way, those cabins were built at the very spot where Dr. Griggs was lifted up by the wind and carried down the valley. And so that's the goal of where they were headed. And as they went along, they would often have to cross rivers. Now you notice that this is Kenny. Kenny's using a pole, and the reason he's using a pole is because pumice gets blown into the rivers, and what looks like a solid riverbed could actually drop down many, many feet, and you would drop into the water, and then you'd be swept down the river and possibly over a waterfall. So Kenny's using a stick there to try and cross those rivers. You know, as they crossed, Dr. Shorman was thinking about the stream power law. This equation is used by many scientists to determine the age of a stream or river. It takes into account the rate of erosion, the hardness of the material the stream is flowing through, the size of its drainage area, and the slope of the water flowing through. Supposedly, using this equation, scientists can figure out how long a river has been cutting through its riverbed. So as they were thinking about that, they came across some of the deposits that you find there in Novarupta. Now, Dr. Robert Griggs found this river. This is the river Lethe. And in his time, Dr. Griggs' time, it had cut 100 feet through the canyon in 5 years. So if you do the math, that's a rate of 20 feet per year. However, by the time Dr. Shorman got there 100 years later, it slowed down. So think about it. If you didn't know about the catastrophe and you went and used the stream power law, and you looked at the water and the slope and the material, and you looked at the current rate of erosion, and you backed up that in time, you would come up with long periods of time. But actually, there was a catastrophe that cut that canyon very rapidly, right? So that's very interesting. By the way, I forgot to mention to you that Kenny and Dr. Shorman actually had superpowers. Did I mention that part? Yeah, there they are. That's actually pumice, which, as you know about pumice, it's when the magma launches into the air, and then it mixes with air and creates air pockets, and it becomes very light. So you can see that they are just surrounded by pumice, right? And that's what they're hiking through. One of the things that they had to face, just like Dr. Griggs did, was pumice storms. That looks pleasant, doesn't it? Now,
Hang on.
What they said is they'd be hiking along, and then a pumice storm would come about every 5 minutes, and they would have to put themselves down while that pumice storm was coming, and they would be flat down and completely covered because it would actually rip their flesh. And then once they were all done, they would start hiking again, and 5 minutes later, another one would come. They said that it sounded like a freight train barreling down from up above. And so there you go, pumice storms. Now, finally, the second day, they actually reached those very luxurious cabins that the geologists use while they're there, and you can see there they are. 5-star accommodations. Here's what it looks like on the inside. Meanwhile, the other team was spending the night at the Buttress Mountains because, remember, they're following behind. And Tommy, when we interviewed Tommy for the documentary, he said that he spent that whole night in his tent thinking about how Dr. Griggs had been blown down the valley, and he didn't sleep a wink because he was afraid that it was going to pick up the tent and blow them down the valley. Well, back with Dr. Shorman and Kenny, they were were finally arriving at Novarupta, and the reason that they went early without the rest of the team is that the weather was starting to get bad. And so here they are arriving at Novarupta. So while Dr. Shorman and Kenny were there, they actually pulled a sample of rhyolite from the lava dome. And for those of you that are into the creation movement, you'll know that Dr. Steve Austin did that with a piece of a rock from the lava dome at Mount St. Helens and had it dated when it was less than 10 years. Whole rock came out to 340,000 years. One of the minerals in the rock came out to 2.8 million years. So Dr. Shorman kind of wanted to repeat that, and so he pulled a piece of rhyolite out. Actually, the eruption was in 1912. He got the sample in 2009. He sent it to the lab in 2012. That would make the rock exactly 100 years old. Guess how old it dated to? 5.5 million years old. Wow. You know, a lot of times when you talk to people about radiometric dating, they talk about it as if it's a fact, and yet every time we date a rock of known age, it always comes back with the wrong age. And so you can just add Dr. Shorman's rock to that list, is another rock that came out to the wrong age. By the way, he had it dated at the New Mexico Geochronological Research Lab, and he used the argon method for those of you that are into that type of stuff. But again, a date of 5.5 million years. You know, after they were at Novarupta, they came back to the cabins, and by that time, the rest of the team made it there. Now, there's another volcano that's just a couple miles away called Katmai. That's what Katmai Park is named after. And they tried to climb Mount Katmai, but failed to do that. This is another picture of Novarupta. Now, I've got to say that while they were on the adventure, this is where the romance comes in. They were carrying a satellite phone. And the reason for carrying the satellite phone is in case anybody gets hurt, you need to contact the outside world, right? But you only have so many minutes on the satellite phone. But Kenny had been dating a girl from Hawaii, and her name was Ashley. And none of the rest of the team wanted to carry the satellite phone because they didn't want the extra weight, so Kenny volunteered to carry the satellite phone. And what he would do at times like this is he would sneak away from the team, and he and Ashley would talk and talk and talk. And then one day, there was no minutes left on the phone. And he realized that they were out in the wilderness with no way to contact somebody in case of an emergency. And he kept trying to tell the rest of the team, but he just couldn't do it. So he kept it a secret from the rest of the team, and he just said, I'll tell them afterwards if we survive. Okay, so there's the romance. More coming later. So after they were unable to climb Mount Katmai, they returned to the whole team to investigate Novarupta. So what exactly happened during the eruption? By the way, you know what was fun working on this documentary? Just a little side note. Novarupta has never been animated or modeled before. And so when we were making the documentary, it was so much fun. I found an animator who was able to animate it for us. And I realized how much work goes into that. Because you can't just hire an animator, right? You've got to have the animator working with the scientists to try and make sure that everything is accurate, right? And so, it's kind of fun, because I believe that we have the first animation of the eruption of Novarupta. So here it is. This is what happened on June 12th of June 6th of 1912.
In Psalm 104, verse 32, it says, "He looketh on the earth, and it trembleth. He toucheth the hills, and they smoke." God is so powerful that a simple touch of his finger and an eruption like this can completely eradicate a landscape and create a completely new one. Mount Katmai is located 6 miles east of Novarupta. Somewhere near Novarupta was a shallow magma chamber filled with molten rhyolite and dacite. A second magma chamber of dacite and andesite was centered beneath Mount Katmai. The 2 magma chambers were connected by a series of underground channels. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon of June 6, 1912, or possibly earlier, rhyolite began spewing and oozing from Novarupta's vent. As the shallow chamber near Novarupta drained, Mount Katmai's chamber started to flow into the void and out Novarupta. As the pressure was relieved from underneath Mount Katmai, the top of that mountain collapsed down inside itself. There was a cubic mile of material that fell 1,000 feet into the void.
Robert Griggs, he thought that Mount Katmai had exploded, and that's what caused the eruption, and that's how all the material filled up the Valley of 10,000 Smokes and the ash that went for thousands of miles. He thought that all came out of Mount Katmai. But actually, what they found out later was that Novarupta, about 6 kilometers to the west of Mount Katmai, that's all the magma came out it, and that's what exploded basically. It's called a Plinian eruption, and it's basically an explosion. The ground just ripped open, and a mountain right next to it, Falling Mountain, a whole third of that just fell into the hole made by a Novarupta. Most of the material actually came out in the first 16 hours, about 70% of it. So the majority of the material came out just right at the beginning of it.
Novarupta exploded in a fury of power. The eruption took place in 60 hours, which have been divided into 5 different episodes. Episode 1 lasted for 16 hours and accounted for 70% of the material that would be ejected.
As soon as Mount Katmai started to break apart, it started to erupt products too. You just think about if a big glacier on top of Mount Katmai that falls into super hot magma, it's going to flash to steam instantly and just blast out of there. And that's what happened. And so mud flows came out of the top, pumice, breccia, it's called, hydrothermal breccia, just rocks and mud mixed together, conglomeration just blasting out of the top of that. It wasn't anywhere near as big as Novarupta, but Mount Katmai did erupt as well. So there were basically 2 eruptions, but the majority of it came out of Novarupta.
During that time, it deposited 9 distinct deposits, filling the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. It caused flows moving at speeds of 450 miles per hour. It began with rhyolite material, then dacite, followed by andesite. Sometimes the different magma types would mix, like batter in a marble cake. At the vent, the molten mixture would shoot high and cool mid-air, falling to the ground as banded pumice. It was about 6 hours into this episode when Mount Katmai began to collapse, releasing mud flows, ash, and hydrothermal rock matrix. During the first 11 hours of the eruption, there was 567 tons of material ejected from Novarupta's vent every second.
Novarupta at its height was releasing the equivalent of 5 Nimitz-class aircraft carriers a second. That was the rate of material coming out. These things are over 100 meters long, and doing that continuously for 10, 11 hours, that would just be incredible to see. It's just hard for us to get our minds around something like that.
At the end of episode 1, there was a short pause for a few hours. Episode 2 was a Plinian eruption, shooting gas and dacite material high up into the air. Although there were earthquakes throughout the entire eruption, which is probably what caused Noisy Mountain to collapse, the largest took place during episode 2, hitting 7.0 on the Richter scale. It blew out almost 3 cubic miles of material. For comparison, here's what 3 cubic miles of magma looks like compared to the skyline of Manhattan. This event also caused pyroclastic density currents, waves of fast-moving gas carrying rock that shot downward at incredible speeds and depositing layer after layer of material. After a short break, Episode 3 shot another 6/10 of a cubic mile of material straight up in the air to fall back, creating even more layers. It also shot out waves of gas and material. This episode ended as material built up around Novarupta's vent and formed a dome, plugging the volcano. Episode 4 blew out the plug, depositing the material around the vent. And finally, Episode 5 was another dome-building event, which replaced the previous one and ending the eruption. During the eruption, entire forests were instantly carbonized as the material barreled down Katmai Valley. When it reached the bottom, the material came to rest, forming a deposit over 700 feet thick in some places.
Isn't that incredible? I look at the power of God. It says he touches the mountains and they smoke. Isn't it amazing, God's power demonstrated through all of this? Well, like you heard, here's some of the actual deposits. And when you think about how these layers were laid down, sometimes there's even microfine layering that happened there at Novarupta. It makes us think of Grand Canyon, right? So they say that that's millions of years, few hours. Millions of years, few hours. What do you think? I think maybe it doesn't have to be millions of years, does it? You know, they spent the night after being up there at the cabin one more night, and they started to head back towards home again. As they were on their way, Tommy, one of the team members, was feeling very sick, and they knew they had to get him back. But they finally got them back, and they found out that the visitor center door was unlocked, and so they snuck into the park's visitor center and spent the night on the floor in the visitor center, and then they got back out before the public started to show up. And then the next morning, they went on a ranger-led talk, and they went on a little field trip to a place called Yucak Falls, which is right next to Brooks Lodge there, and they saw a layer called the Naknek Formation. The Naknek Formation stretches from the Alaskan Range in the east all the way past the Pribilof Islands to the Bering Sea, which is over 1,000 miles. You can see this layer of Naknek. It's over 14,000 feet thick in some areas. This deposit is said to be comprised of rapidly eroded coastal sediments mixed with a considerable volume of volcanic debris. Let's see, coastal sediments and volcanic debris. What does that sound like? The Naknek Formation is a sediment gravity flow, and what that is it's when water is mixing with the sediment, and it's this huge mass of particles that's just swirling, and it's just laying it down as one single fluid. The amount of material that can be moved by these flows shows its catastrophic nature, and it speaks of a gigantic force of water. Guess what Dr. Shorman thinks this is? Laid down by the flood, right? But not only that, we also find a large concentration of marine fossils, including clams, right there in the Naknek Formation. Pretty amazing, huh? So they concluded that first tour. Now back to the romance real quick. Kenny had run out his cell phone or his satellite phone minutes talking to Ashley and was really convinced that she was the one, and they came back from the expedition, and guess what Kenny did? He proposed, and they were married, and not too long after that, Dr. Shorman decided that it was time for another expedition, this time to the backside of Novarupta, where no human had been since Dr. Griggs. No human had been there for 100 years, and here they are in the seaplane, and look who's there with them. There's Ashley, right? So Ashley decided to go along. This time it was Dr. Shorman, Kenny, and Ashley. By the way, Ashley had never been on a camping trip before. This was her first camping trip. By the way, just before she went on the trip, she bought boots and didn't try them on. I can see that you're all experienced. So here they are on the getting on the seaplane. Dr. Shorman's goal was to demonstrate that there is a creation, flood, ice age, and present conditions. He wanted to find those in the rock record, and so that's what his goal was to photograph those. And they would spend 4 days exploring Katmai Valley, Mount Katmai itself, and Noisy Mountain. Those are some of the mountains that are around the volcano there. Here you can see the float plane flying in. Now, it's really interesting because remember, man hadn't been there for 100 years. So when the seaplane pilot was flying them in, they were supposed to land at a little tiny lake called Katmai Lake. But the pilot said, actually, the lake is so small I won't be able to take off again from that lake, so we're going to have to land at Lake Dakavac because I'll be able to get off the lake again. And then at the last minute, he changed his mind and said, we could land at Katmai, and if you remove all of your weight and all of the luggage, all your supplies, I'll be able to take off again. By the way, just as they were landing, Dr. Shorman asked the pilot, by the way, how do you get from Lake Katmai to Lake Dakavac? And the seaplane pilot just laughed and said, nobody's done that. So Dr. Shorman was checking the GPS and the maps, and there was no map whatsoever of how to get from the one lake to the next. Now, what's funny is they actually had a tracking unit on them, so Dr. Shorman's wife, Karen, could be tracking their movements, and when she saw that they landed at Katmai instead of Lake Dakavac, she wondered what had gone wrong, and his daughter actually wondered if Dr. Shorman had been eaten by a bear, and the bear was running around with the tracking unit in it. So anyway, so there you go. Here they are out exploring. You can see there's the Katmai Canyon. Remember how Dr. Griggs found the big canyon carved very quickly by the rapid flood? There's a picture of that canyon. They got to explore that. They also got to photograph exactly what Dr. Shorman was looking for. If you'll notice, you've got the Naknek Formation, which is flood deposits. And then above that, you've got glacial till, which would be the Ice Age. And then above that, you've got the rapidly deposited sediments not sediments, but the material from Novarupta. You've got the whole biblical pattern right there in the rocks. And so isn't it awesome that right there at Novarupta, it tells the whole story? They wanted to go and climb Mount Katmai. Remember how the last team failed to do it this time with Dr. Shorman and Kenny and Ashley? They tried again, but as they started to climb, that's the wrong mountain. I don't know why I got that picture in there. That's actually Novarupta. But Mount Katmai, they tried to climb it, and they couldn't do it because Ashley's feet were bleeding. And she said, I can do it. And Kenny said, no, I'm not going to do that to you. So to get back to their camp, they had to cross one of the rivers.
This is a completely different section of the river than we crossed before.
I know, but look how much narrower it is here. Are you willing to give it a try?
I'll do it. I want to get back to camp and get warm and out of these boots.
Me too. Okay, make sure to use your poles. I don't want you falling into any pits. Okay, let's go together. 1, 2, 3. Whoa! Whew. Oh wow, that's really cold.
I didn't think it was possible, but somehow it's even colder than last time.
Let's get across fast.
Okay,
Ashley!
I'm in above my waist. Kitty, oh please, I can't make it across this.
It's so deep, and the current's running too fast. Don't let it wash you downstream. Here, grab my hand. Let's get back to shore.
I feel as if the wind knocked out of me. It's hard to breathe.
Me too, but come on. We can make it back together. Come on, together. We can do this. Just a little further.
Kenny, I can't feel my legs anymore. Can you?
No, but don't think about it. We're almost back to shore. Come on, 3 more steps. 2. Okay, up onto the bank. Oh.
I'm so tired.
Me too. Let's rest for a second, and then we need to find another spot to cross.
To Ashley, she said that you would cross the river and you would make it through, and then you would ask yourself, do I have to cross this 10 more times? And she said it was so demoralizing. That day they made it back to their base camp, and the next day was the day that they were supposed to meet their seaplane that was coming in at Dakavac. They were running low on supplies, so it was important that they met up with the plane. So they made a plan, and they woke up the next morning, and they started hiking to try and make it to Lake Dakavac. Remember that there was no trails or anything about knowing how to get to where they were going. And pretty soon they started to get back into foliage again. And pretty soon the trees were so thick that they couldn't fit through, and they were going up a cliff, and they were having to pull themselves by the trees to get up these cliffs. And eventually they got onto a ridge, and they kept going, and pretty soon it was a dead end, and they realized that they weren't going to make it to the lake in time. And so they ended up spending the night. The next morning, they had to make it very quickly, so they started again to try and make it down to Dakavac Lake. Again, they went a long ways, and then they came to a huge waterfall, and then they had to backpack all the way back to where their camp was, and then they had to start again, and they hit another dead end. And then finally, they found a stream bed and followed that down, and it made it to Dakavac Lake, the first people in 100 years to make that route, and they made it just a couple hours before the seaplane made it. And so they made it through their adventure. Here they are. Well, getting back to where we started with all of this kind of data could have shown that the earth is young. If that had happened, Darwin's ideas would have been refuted and abandoned. You know what? When it comes to radioisotope dating, radiometric dating, if you take that away, it takes away the age of layers and fossils and all of those other things. Those all just disappear. And we see that canyons can be formed very quickly. We see that layers can be laid down very rapidly. We've seen that rocks that are of known age always date to the wrong age. So I think I would say it maybe this way. This kind of data did show that the earth is young. And since that happened, Darwin's ideas have been refuted and abandoned. And that's the implication of all of this. So I'm going to end out here by saying, what did our explorers learn from their trip? I'll let them tell you.
I think if others were to have the same experience as we did in Novarupta, I think that it would strengthen their relationship with God as far as being able to be out in creation and see His power and see that the evidence of what He says really is true, and that just there's something about being out there that I think you put a lot of trust in Him, and it really draws you closer to Him.
Yeah, I think after hiking through Novarupta, things that I've learned that'll help me in the future is to have patience and to just trust yourself and trust God and know that He is in control, and that you don't need to worry about the little things, that if you trust that it will all work out and we'll all be okay.
I think it's important for Christians to know about Novarupta because it's a great example of the power of God. And we read in Matthew 22:29, Jesus told the Sadducees, He told them they were in error because they did not know Scripture very well and they did not know the power of God. And so, we need to study Scripture, but we also need to study His creation and get to know Him better that way. And so it's just an incredible testimony. The biggest eruption in over 100 years now, and there's just so much power that goes with an event like that, and that could only be possible by a more powerful being in charge of all of that.
All right, just very quickly to mention, we've actually got the documentary that we did. We also did an audio drama. If you want to know more, you heard about this much of the story, so there's a lot more to know. Let me end in prayer, and I'm going to scoot off the stage so we can have the next presentation. Dear Father, thank you so much that we can trust your word. Father, I thank you that when we do the chronologies in the Bible, we see that the earth is young. And Father, thank you so much that as Christians, we can take the blinders off and go out and investigate the world and see that it fits exactly what you told us. And Father, I pray for all of us that we would be encouraged every time we investigate and see how the science is in harmony with your word, Father. And God, I just thank you for this time that we've all had together this weekend. And Father, I pray you would continue to give us just a great time of fellowship. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, guys.